Brahma Sutra Bhashya. Brahma Sutra Bhashya. There is a text that has shaped the course of Indian philosophy more decisively than perhaps any other single work. We know it as the Brahma Sutra Bhashya, the great commentary on the aphorisms of Badarayana, and it is attributed to the teacher Shankara, who lived sometime in the early centuries of the first millennium. Scholars continue to debate the precise dates and even the singular authorship, and the honest position is that we cannot be entirely certain who held the pen. What we can say is that the text emerged from a moment of genuine intellectual crisis, when Buddhist, Samkhya, and Mimamsa thinkers had each built rigorous and mutually incompatible accounts of reality, and that the Bhashya was composed to meet that crisis head-on. Its central claim is at once the simplest and the most demanding in all of Vedanta, that what you are, at your most essential, is identical to what reality is, at its most fundamental. The text moves from the anatomy of our ordinary confusion all the way to the nature of liberation itself. With that, let us enter the commentary. A note before we begin. What follows is a 12-phase reading, a scaffold I have built to help the listener find footing in a text of very considerable size. It is not Shankara's own organizational scheme. Shankara organized his commentary into 4 chapters and a series of topical sections called adhikaranas, each devoted to resolving a specific exegetical question. The 12 phases here map onto selected stations from the first chapter and a half of that structure, and the final phase draws on material distributed across the 3rd and 4th chapters. The bulk of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th chapters, which cover Shankara's systematic refutations of rival schools and his detailed treatment of spiritual practice and the mechanics of liberation, lie outside our scope in this edition. Readers who wish to follow the full argument are warmly directed to the translations of Swami Gambhirananda and the sub-commentaries of the Bhamati, Ratnaprabha, Naiyanirnya, and Anandagiri traditions, which anchor the interpretive moves you will hear today in the actual scholastic lineage from which they come. With that said, let us enter the commentary. Brahma Sutra Bhashya, the Sovereign Foundation. Phase 1. The Anatomy of the Error. It is a fact of common experience. The subject, the I, and the object, the this, are as different as light and darkness. The subject is awareness, unmoving and shoreless. The object is the body, the senses, and the world, limited and changing. Logic dictates that they can never be one. You cannot attribute the qualities of the shadow to the sun, nor can you attribute the heat of the fire to the wood. And yet, in every heartbeat, in every thought, the human mind performs an impossible marriage. Superimposition is the appearance of a previously experienced thing in another place, like the memory of a dream. Consider the snake and the rope. You have seen a real snake before. You see a rope in the dark. You glue the memory of the snake onto the reality of the rope. The snake you fear is not a total nonentity, but it is not the truth of the rope either. It is a mutant perception. It is the mixing of the real and the unreal. Shankara identifies 2 surgical leaks in our awareness. The first, attributing the Atman to the body. You say, I am sick, I am walking, I am dying. You have stolen the properties of the decaying flesh and pasted them onto the eternal spirit. The second, attributing the body to the self. You say the self is located here, the self is limited. You have taken the border of the cage and believed it was the border of the bird. This is avidya, the misidentification. It is not a lack of information. It is a cognitive superimposition, the mistaken view that allows you to say I and mine about a heap of changing matter and a collection of passing thoughts. The student asks, when did this era begin? Who started it? Shankara declares, it is beginningless and natural. It does not have a first day because time itself is part of the era. It is the very software of biological existence. As long as you act, as long as you perceive, as long as you breathe, you are operating within the field of this superimposition. The person you think you are is a byproduct of this Maya. Why are we here? Because this era is the cause of all your grief. It makes the infinite feel small. It makes the ocean feel thirsty. It makes the immortal fear the clock. The purpose of the entire Brahma Sutra and of Shankara's commentary is the removal of this superimposition. We do not seek to reach Brahman. We seek to dissolve the mistake that makes us believe we are not Brahman already. Phase 2. The Hunger for Truths. Sutra 111. Athato Brahmajanasa. Now therefore the inquiry into Brahman. The first word of the blueprint is atha, now. Shankara asks, what does now mean? It is not a reference to time but a reference to condition. Now means after the seeker has acquired 4 qualities: discrimination between the eternal and the fading, dispassion for the fruits of action, the 6 inner assets of calmness and self-control and endurance and the rest, and the hunger for freedom. Unless the mind has been scrubbed clean of the desire for results, the inquiry cannot begin. If you are still looking for a paycheck from the universe, you are looking for a bigger cage, not for the king. The second word is atta, therefore. Why must we inquire into Brahman? Because we see that all results produced by action are finite. A house built by labor eventually crumbles. Merit earned by ritual eventually runs dry. A heaven gained by good deeds eventually ejects the soul. Since every doing leads to a perishing, the seeker realizes that being cannot be a product of action. Therefore we must turn to knowledge. We seek that which is not made, but which eternally is. We inquire into Brahman, because the world of deeds has been proven to be a bankrupt theater. Jnana is the desire to know. Brahman is the vastness. What kind of desire is this? It is the desire to end the doubt about one's own nature. There is a fundamental paradox. If Brahman were totally unknown, we could not even desire to know it. If Brahman were perfectly known, there would be no need for inquiry. Brahman is the self, the Atman. Everyone knows I exist. No one says I am not. But the who of that existence is hidden by the fog of superimposition. We desire to know Brahman not as a distant star, but as the substratum of our own pulse. The ritualist objects. The Veda is a book of action. Knowledge is only useful if it tells us what to do, but knowledge of Brahman does not command an action. It ends the actor. When you realize the rope is a rope, you do not do anything to the snake. The snake simply ceases to exist. The inquiry into Brahman is the only act that destroys the very capacity to be a doer. Sutra 111 is the declaration of war against ignorance. The seeker must be armed. The world of action is incomplete. The truth is the self. The inquiry is not a debate. It is a metamorphosis. We are not studying Brahman as a subject in a book. We are using the logic of the sutras to dissolve the I that is currently reading the book. Phase 3. The signature of the source. Sutra 112. Janmadhyasya Yata. Brahman is that from which the birth and subsistence and dissolution of this universe proceed. The seeker asks, "You have told me to inquire into Brahman, but what is Brahman? How do I recognize the Absolute in a world of shadows?" Shankara responds, "We define a thing by its signature. Just as you know the fire by its heat or the flower by its scent, you know Brahman by the act of the universe." Brahman is the substance from which this entire theater, with its trillions of stars, its intricate biological machines, and its unshakable physical laws, is born, in which it breathes, and into which it finally dissolves. Look at the world. It is not a chaotic explosion. It is an ordered masterpiece. It contains infinite varieties of names and forms. It is governed by the laws of space and time and causality. It provides the exact fruits for the billions of different actions performed by souls. Dead matter cannot plan. Random chance cannot produce a law. Just as a house implies an architect and a poem implies a poet, this world effect implies an omniscient and omnipotent cause. Brahman is the only entity vast enough and aware enough to hold the blueprint of the totality. The logician says, God is like a potter who makes a pot out of clay. God is the maker, but the world is made of something else. Shankara rejects this split. If the clay were separate from God, then God would be limited by the clay. In the Brahma Sutras, we prove that Brahman is both the efficient cause, the intelligence that plans the world, and the material cause, the substance out of which the world is made. Consider the spider. It does not go to a market to buy silk. It secretes the web from its own body. It is the architect of the web, and it is also the substance of the web. Brahman projects the universe out of his own being, sustains it within himself, and retracts it back into his own silence. The sub-commentaries of the Bhimati and Anandagiri traditions clarify a vital distinction. Is creating the world the essential nature of Brahman? No, creatorship is an indicative mark, a temporary sign we use to identify the target. It is like pointing to a house and saying, "That house where the crow is perched belongs to Devadatta." The crow is not part of the house, and it is not part of Devadatta. The world is that crow. We use the world's birth and death to point the mind toward Brahman, but Brahman remains the changeless absolute even while appearing to be a creator. You are not a stranger in a cold material universe. You are standing on the very substance of your own self. The stars are not far away. They are vibrating within the same awareness that is reading these words. Phase 4. The Authority of the Light. Sutra 113, Shastrayonitvat. Because Brahman is the source of the scripture, and because the scripture is the source of our knowledge of Brahman. Shankara explains that this sutra carries two distinct meanings, both necessary. First, Brahman is the source and author of the great scriptures, the Vedas. Second, the scripture is the means of our knowledge of Brahman. By this dual interpretation, we establish both the omniscience of Brahman and the necessity of revelation. The skeptic asks, how do we know Brahman is all-knowing? Shankara responds, look at the Vedas. They are like a vast ancient ocean of knowledge, covering every law of the universe, every ritual, every secret of the heart. Even a small book on medicine requires an intelligent author. How much more, then, must the book of all truth require a source? The Vedas are described as having been breathed out by Brahman. Just as a man breathes without effort, the infinite breathes out the laws of the universe. Because the scripture is the highest possible knowledge, and it comes from Brahman, Brahman must be omniscient. You cannot give what you do not possess. The logician argues, I do not need your books. I can prove God exists simply by looking at the world. I see an effect, I infer a cause. My reason is enough. Shankara rejects this. Reason can suggest a maker, but it can never reveal Brahman. Perception only sees physical forms. Inference only works with things that have marks, like smoke pointing to fire. But Brahman is formless and without such marks. He is the subject, not an object in the world. To try to find Brahman through mere human logic is like trying to hear a color or taste a sound. You are using the wrong instrument. The scripture is not a theory. It is a valid instrument of knowledge, just like the eye. If a blind man wants to see the sun, he does not argue his way to sight. He undergoes surgery to open his eyes. The Shastra is that surgery. It provides the special data that the biological brain cannot manufacture. It reveals Brahman as the self, a truth that no amount of looking at the stars could ever provide. Brahman is omniscient, for he is the womb of all wisdom. Brahman is transcendental, for he cannot be captured by the senses. The word is the only bridge to the absolute. Stop trying to think your way to God. Your thoughts are just ripples in a small pond. Instead, listen to the lion's roar of the Upanishad. The scripture is not a map of a distant land. It is the mirror that shows you your own face. Phase 5. The Great Harmony. Sutra 114, Tat 2 Samanvayat. But that Brahman is known from the scripture alone, because it is the main purport of all Upanishadic texts. The ritualist launches a final attempt. The Veda is a book of injunctions. It exists to tell us what to do and what to avoid. If a sentence like, that thou art, does not command an action, it is merely empty praise designed to make us feel good while we perform rituals. Brahman cannot be the goal, for knowing is not an act that produces a result. Shankara responds, you are trying to turn the mirror into a shovel. The Veda has two distinct departments. The first deals with action to purify the heart. The second deals with fact to set the heart free. The Upanishads are not work orders. They are declarations of reality. Shankara draws a surgical line between two types of objects. The first is the to be done, a pot, a heaven, a ritual result. These do not exist until you act. The second is the already established, the gold in the ring or Brahman in the self. Knowledge of Brahman is not a doing. If liberation were the result of an action, it would be temporary, for every action has a limited energy. But liberation is eternal. Therefore, it must be the recognition of an existing fact. The Upanishads do not tell you to create Brahman. They tell you to stop ignoring Brahman. The word Samanvaya means perfect harmony. Shankara proves that all Upanishadic arrows hit the same bulls. To find the main meaning of a text, the sages use 6 tests. Do the beginning and end both speak of oneness? Is the truth of identity stated again and again? Is this truth something we could not find elsewhere? Does the knowledge lead to the end of grief? Does the text glorify the state of oneness? Is the teaching supported by reason? Every Upanishad passes all 6 tests for non-duality. The harmony is total. The Veda is not a scattered collection of rituals. It is a sovereign system designed to incinerate the sense of the other. The Mahavakya, that thou art, is not a command to meditate. It is a linguistic lightning bolt that forces the mind to see the truth. The Upanishads are an independent source of truth. The truth is a fact to be known, not a task to be done. The goal of all revelation is the identity of the self and the absolute. The inquiry is no longer a search for a moral code. It is a forensic investigation into your own being. You are not a subject of the Veda. You are the subject matter of the Veda. Phase 6. The Gaze of Intelligence. Sutra 115. Iksheta Nashabdam. Because of seeing, because of thinking, the pradhana is not the cause, it not being founded on the scripture. The Sankhya philosopher argues, why do you need a conscious God? Look at the world. It is made of parts, of matter, of energy. The cause of the universe is pradhana, nature in its raw, unmanifested, unconscious state. Just as milk flows from a cow to feed a calf without thinking, nature evolves into the world to serve the soul. Dead matter is the only necessary cause. Shankara responds, you are trying to build a cathedral using only the wind. If the source of all things thought before it acted, then your dead matter is logically excluded. Shankara points to the Chandogya Upanishad. In the beginning, my dear, this was being alone. It saw, let me be many, let me grow forth. The word used is ekshata, it saw, it thought. Perception and deliberation are properties of consciousness. A stone does not see, a vacuum does not think. Because the scripture explicitly describes the first cause as performing an act of intelligence, the unconscious pradhana of the Sankhyas is not founded on the word. The universe is not an accidental explosion of dust. It is a luminous intent. The Sankhya retreats, but seeing is just a metaphor. Perhaps being saw simply means nature was ready to explode into form. Shankara corrects this. In the laboratory of logic, we only use metaphors when the literal meaning is impossible. Is it impossible for the first cause to be conscious? No. In fact, the self is the only thing we know with complete certainty to be conscious. Furthermore, the text later says to the seeker that thou art. If the cause were unconscious matter, the Veda would be telling you that you are a piece of dead wood. But the Veda exists to set you free, not to bury you in the mud. Therefore the seeing must be literal. Look at the arrangement of the universe, the precise orbits of the planets, the intricate coding of the life force, the mathematical beauty of the elements. Dead matter is dull. Can a pile of bricks arrange itself into a palace? Can a blind man direct a choir? The arrangement is the forensic footprint of an omniscient gaze. The source of the world is sentient. The world is a projected thought, not a physical accident. The gaze that built the galaxies is the same gaze looking through your eyes right now. Phase 7. The Demolition of the Pradhana. Sutras 116 through 1111. The Sankhya opponent attempts a final semantic escape. You say the first cause saw, but we say this seeing is metaphorical, like saying the fire looks angry or the water is running. Just as fire is not literally angry, the pradhana does not literally think. Shankara responds, in the laboratory of truth, we do not resort to metaphors when the literal is available. If the first cause is the self, and the self is known by everyone to be aware, why invent a metaphor? The Veda later calls this seeing being the self of the seeker. If you tell a living, breathing man that unconscious matter is his self, you have not taught him, you have insulted the light. Shankara then applies the knife to the purpose of life. If the pradhana were the cause, the Veda would not lead us toward liberation by identifying with it. Liberation is described as the soul merging into the cause. If the cause were dead matter, then liberation would be total annihilation. It would be like a man trying to reach the sun by jumping into a pit of cold mud. The Veda exists to lead us to bliss, not to stupor. Identifying with an unconscious cause would produce a state of stone-like unconsciousness. Since the goal is the mass of awareness, the source must be aware. If you tell a student he is nature, and then tell him he must use his intellect to go beyond nature, you have built a logical trap. How can a man use a faculty, intelligence, to realize that he is fundamentally something that lacks that faculty, dead matter? The seeker and the sought must share the same fabric, consciousness. The Upanishad says of the sleeper, he reaches being, he has gone to his own self. If the soul dissolved into unconscious nature every night, it would be a nightly suicide. But the sleeper returns with his identity intact, having tasted a fragment of bliss. The home we return to every night is not a vacuum of matter, but the ocean of the self. Whether you read the Katha, the Mundaka, or the Chandogya, every arrow points to a conscious substratum. There is no conflict of evidence. The Veda does not have a materialist department. The Shvetashvatara explicitly calls him the Lord of the Lords of the senses. He has no parent and he has no master. He is the knower. You are not a brain event. You are not a biological accident. You are the original intent of the universe. Phase 8. The Anatomy of Bliss. Sutras 1.1.12 through 1.1.19. The Taittiriya Upanishad describes a ladder of internal persons: the body of food, the body of breath, the body of mind, the body of intellect, and finally the body of bliss, the Anandamya. The skeptic asks, is this Anandamya the most interior of all the supreme Brahman, or is it just the finest layer of the human ego? If it is described as having a head and wings, with love and joy and great joy as its parts, surely it is a limited and created thing. Shankara responds, in the opening sutra of this section, Sutra 1.1.12, Anandamyabhyasat. The Anandamya is Brahman on account of repetition. We identify the Anandamya with Brahman here because the word bliss is used again and again in the scripture to describe the absolute. However, we must distinguish between the joyous one and the substance of joy. The opponent argues, and Sutra 1.1.13 presses this objection, Vikarashabdana iti chena prachuryat. The word maya usually indicates modification or product. If the person is made of bliss, he is a modification, and therefore not the changeless Brahman. Shankara clarifies the grammar. The suffix maya also means abundance. Just as a city is called food maya because it is overflowing with grain, Brahman is called Anandamya because he is overflowing with bliss. He is the son of joy. The abundance does not imply he is a product of joy. It implies he is the shoreless ocean from which all drops of worldly happiness are drawn. Now comes Sutra 1.1.14, and it carries a distinction that must not be swallowed silently. Tadupadshat, because that Brahman is taught in the context of this very section. The Taittiriya text, having described the 5 sheaths in ascending order, does not leave the student to wonder whether the Anandamya is merely the subtlest product of nature. It teaches, directly and immediately, that Brahman is the foundation of the Anandamya. The progression is not from gross matter to increasingly refined matter. It is from matter toward the witness of matter. The Upanishad is not describing a Chinese box of nested egos. It is performing a guided stripping away, and the text itself points past every layer to the one who remains when all layers have been set aside. The Anandamya is not the terminus. It is the penultimate veil, and the scripture identifies what lies behind it. Sutra 1.115 continues, Mata Sampratyayat, because the bliss of Brahman is recognized in the experience of the wise. Here Shankara makes a pointed move. The Taittiriya Upanishad concludes its teaching by asking whether a man who knew Brahman, who was established in the Absolute, would fear anything at all. The answer is no. If the Anandamya were a limited psychological state, a refined emotional texture, the realized man would still be subject to its fluctuations. But the text promises an end to fear. Only the recognition of the infinite source of bliss, not a refined product of bliss, could produce that unshakable condition. The bliss being spoken of here is recognized in the experience of those who have penetrated the veil of the Anandamya and rested in what supports it. Sutra 1.116 Enyatha Anumito API Kevalam 2 Upade Shavat. Even if the bliss were inferred differently by the opponent, the teaching of the scripture alone is authoritative here, not the inference. The Mimamsaka and the logician may construct arguments that the Anandamya is simply the subtlest modification of the ego sense, drawing on the inference that whatever is described with parts must be composite. Shankara does not dismiss the inference entirely, but places it firmly below the authority of the Sruti. When the direct testimony of the Upanishad and the inference of the logician diverge, the Upanishad is the stronger pramana, the more reliable instrument. We are not reasoning our way toward bliss. We are listening our way toward it. Sutra 1.117, Bedavaya On account of the declaration of difference, here a new objection arises. The Upanishad speaks of the individual soul attaining bliss. If the soul and Brahman were already identical, how can the text describe the soul as reaching or obtaining the blissful one? Is this not a declaration of real difference between the knower and the known? Shankara answers, the declaration of difference belongs to the context of ignorance. From the standpoint of the aspirant who has not yet recognized his own nature, there appears to be a journey from the limited to the infinite. But the teaching of identity is the goal toward which that apparent journey moves. The difference is pedagogical, not ontological. The text uses difference as a rope to pull the student across the river, not as a fence to keep him on the far bank. Sutra 1.118, Kamaka Nanumanapsham. And because of desire, and because no inference is needed beyond the scripture. The Taittiriya text speaks of Brahman as that which desired, let me be many. Desire is a property of consciousness. What desires is aware. The Anandamya, insofar as it points toward the cause that desired to become the many, is pointing toward a conscious principle, not an inert one. No further inference beyond the scriptural testimony is required to establish this. The very structure of the cosmogonic narrative confirms what the analytic arguments have been building toward. Sutra 1.119, Atma iti tu upagakanti grihnantikati, but they accept and recognize this as the self. Shankara's concluding move in this section is to gather the entire Taittiriya teaching into a single observation. The sages who have followed the Upanishad's ascent through the 5 sheaths do not arrive at a refined psychological state. They arrive at the recognition of the self. The word used by the Upanishad at the apex of the teaching is Atman. The Anandamya is not the final word, because the final word is the one who supports the Anandamya, and that supporter is the self. The text says, precisely, Brahma Pakam Pratishtha, Brahman is the tail, the foundation, the support. The bird of joy has a tail feather, and it is the changeless absolute. Shankara points to the technical anatomy provided by the Upanishad. The Anandamya is described as a bird of joy. Love is the head, joy is the right wing, great joy is the left wing, bliss is the trunk, and Brahman is the tail. The bird is the reflection of the absolute in the quiet mind. The tail is the absolute substance itself. Just as the anchor of a ship is what makes the ship a stable platform, Brahman is the unmoving support of the entire psychological experience of joy. Sovereignty is realized when you stop identifying with the flapping wings of temporary joy and root yourself in the unmoving foundation of existence. The Upanishad says, the soul attains this blissful one and becomes happy. If the soul and the blissful one were the same in the state of ignorance, there would be no talk of attaining. The seeker is the limited I, the sought is the infinite bliss. The bridge is the removal of the idea of search. You are not looking for a new feeling of happiness. Feelings are ripples in the Anandamya sheath. They have a beginning and an end. You are the witness of the feeling. Sovereignty is the capacity to be the support for your own joy and your own sorrow. The king has realized that he is the solid gold, and even the highest bliss is just a temporary ornament he wears. Phase 9. The light in the eye. Sutras 1.120 and 1.121. The Chandogya Upanishad speaks of a mystery. Now that golden person who is seen within the sun, with a golden beard and golden hair, his name is high, for he has risen above all evil. The skeptic asks, is this golden person truly the supreme Brahman? He is described with a body, hair, and a specific location. Brahman is formless and everywhere. Surely this is just a powerful deity, a limited individual soul who has earned a celestial throne through merit. Shankara responds, we identify the dweller by his attributes. The text says this person is free from all evil. Only Brahman is eternally untouched by the shadow of ignorance. Furthermore, he is described as the Lord of all worlds. A limited deity, no matter how powerful, is always a subject of the law. Only the sovereign is the source of the law. The Upanishad continues, the person seen within the eye is the same as the person in the sun. Why does the absolute manifest in the sun and the eye? The sun represents the highest point of the objective world. The eye represents the highest point of the subjective world. The light that allows you to see the world is identical to the light that makes the world visible. By equating these two, the Veda performs a macro-microscopic identity. It proves that the external universe and the internal observer are not two separate things. They are the same awareness reflecting in different-sized mirrors. Now Sutra 1.121 in the canonical text reads, Vedavyapachat, on account of the declaration of difference. This sutra is not a generic statement about someone different from the individual soul. It is specifically concerned with the inner ruler, the Antaryaman, whose identity is at stake across this section. The opponent presses, does not the Chandogya itself distinguish between the person in the sun and the person in the eye, treating them as two distinct presences? Is not the very act of distinguishing them a declaration of real ontological difference? Shankara responds, the declaration of difference here is the Upanishad's pedagogical strategy, not its metaphysical conclusion. The text differentiates the two persons in order to lead the student from the gross to the subtle, from the outer light to the inner light, and finally to the recognition that the inner ruler inhabiting both stations is one and the same Brahman. The difference pointed to by Bheda is the apparent difference perceived by the bound seeker, not the ultimate fact disclosed by the teaching. The Antaryamin is not another entity alongside the soul. He is the deepest identity of the soul, temporarily obscured by superimposition. The opponent objects, but why the golden hair and golden beard? Form belongs to matter, not to spirit. Shankara clarifies, form is attributed to Brahman not as a fact of his nature, but as a tool for meditation. To help the mind, which is used to seeing forms, the Veda describes the Absolute as golden, meaning self-luminous. Just as a man points to the tip of a tree to show someone the faint crescent moon behind it, the Veda points to the person in the sun to lead the mind to the pure awareness that supports the sun. Brahman is not trapped in heaven, he is the presence within the eye. Brahman is not limited to the heart, he is the power within the sun. The person in you and the person in the stars are one. Stop looking up for God and down at yourself. The gaze that looks out of your pupils is the same light that burns at the center of the galaxy. Sovereignty is the realization that space is an optical illusion. Distance vanishes when the seer recognizes himself in the most remote scene. Vase 10. The space in the heart. Sutra 1.122, Akashastalingat. The space is Brahman because its characteristic marks are mentioned. The Chandogya Upanishad records a question. What is the goal of this world? The answer, space. For all these beings take their rise from space only and return to space. The materialist argues, why look for a mysterious Brahman? The text is plain, it says space. We know space is the first element born in creation. It is vast, all-pervading, and holds everything. There is no need to invent a spirit when the physical element of ether perfectly fits the description of the source. Shankara responds, you are mistaking the container for the content. We do not define a thing by its name alone, but by its signature. If the qualities attributed to space in this text are impossible for a material element to possess, then the word space must be understood as a pointer to the absolute. The text says all beings take their rise from space. This means the totality, but a material element like physical space cannot be the cause of itself. The text says space is greater than all these and the ultimate goal. Physical space is an effect. It is limited and inert and part of the created world. Only Brahman is greater than all. Only Brahman is the ultimate goal. Therefore the space mentioned here is not the sky above your head. It is the infinite awareness, in which even the sky is a tiny ripple. If space were the physical element, then liberation would be a return to dead matter. But the scripture promises that knowing this space leads to immortality. Material space is insentient. It cannot know and it cannot grant freedom. When a word has both a common meaning and a spiritual meaning, the context of attributes decides the truth. Since the attributes here are infinite, greater than all, and the end of grief, the physical element is disqualified. Why does the Veda use the word space for Brahman? Shankara explains, like space, Brahman is everywhere. Like space, Brahman cannot be grasped by the hand. Like space, Brahman is not dirtied by the objects it contains. Brahman is the space within the heart, the Daharakasha. It is called space to help the mind transition from the small I to the infinite all. The king uses the name of the largest thing in the world to point to the only thing that is the world. The void is actually awareness. The universe does not sit in empty space. It sits in you. Phase 11. The breath of life. Sutra 1.123. Arta eva prana. For the same reason, the breath is Brahman. The Chandogya Upanishad records a dialogue where the sage is asked which is that deity. He answers, breath. For all these beings merge into breath alone, and from breath they arise. The physiological materialist argues, why look for a spirit when the biological air is sufficient? Without breath, the body dies. Breath is the most evident force of life. It is tangible and measurable. There is no reason to look past the physical air to find a cause for the universe. Shankara responds, you are mistaking the pneumatic engine for the conscious engineer. The word prana is used for Brahman for the same reason that space was used in the previous sutra. The marks of the infinite are present in the description. The text says all beings merge into it and rise from it. This includes not just humans but the elements, the stars, and the gods themselves. Physical air can sustain a body, but it cannot be the womb for the sun, the mind, or the void. A material element cannot produce consciousness. Other texts declare that in deep sleep, all senses and elements merge into the supreme awareness, not into a puff of air. If breath is the source and goal of the entire cosmos, then breath is a synonym for Brahman. The physical breath is just a tiny local ripple of that universal pulse. If breath were merely the biological life force, then liberation would be a state of mindless vitality. But the Upanishad promises that knowing this prana leads to the end of grief. When the Veda says prana is the son or prana is the father, it is performing an expansion of identity. It is leading the mind from the internal air to the universal intelligence that allows the air to move. Nothing is more alive than Brahman. Nothing is more alive than breath. Just as you cannot live for a second without breath, the universe cannot exist for a second without Brahman, and breath is felt inside. By using this word, the Veda forces you to look for God not in a temple, but in the very act of existing. Brahman is the breath of the breath. Stop seeing your breath as a mere biological exchange of gases. That rhythm is the heartbeat of the Absolute. Every inhalation is the universe being born in you. Every exhalation is the universe returning to its source. Sovereignty is the realization that you are not the one who breathes, but the awareness that allows the breath to happen. Phase 12. The arrival at the Absolute. What follows draws on material distributed across the 3rd and 4th chapters of the Bhashya, chapters dealing with the means of knowledge, the nature of the path, and the condition of the liberated one. The great middle section of the text, Shankara's systematic dismantling of the Vaisheshika, Jain, Buddhist, and other rival schools in the 2nd chapter, along with the detailed analysis of meditative practice and the mechanics of the soul's departure from the body in the 3rd, lies outside the scope of this edition. Those who wish to follow the full architecture of the argument are encouraged to pursue a complete translation. What we take now is a reading of the destination, offered in the spirit of the whole. The skeptic asks, you have built the foundation and analyzed the tools. Now what is the fruit? Is liberation a place we go to? Is it a change in the soul's nature? Or is it a gift from the Lord? Shankara responds, liberation is not a result of action, for it is not a product. If freedom were made, it would be mortal. If freedom were reached, it would be distant. If freedom were gifted, it would be dependent. Liberation is the removal of the obstacle. It is the recognition of a fact that was never absent. The arrival is the realization that the traveler was always the destination. How does the sovereign live after the world appearance has been seen through? Shankara analyzes the status of the sage who still wears a body. The sage is like a burnt rope. It retains the form of a rope, but it can no longer bind anything. The body, the senses, and the social name remain as a sublated appearance. The stored past is burned to ash by knowledge. Future actions do not stick to him like water on a lotus leaf. The current momentum of life continues until the arrow hits the ground. Sovereignty is the capacity to inhabit a physical frame while knowing with certainty, I am the sky in which this body is currently falling. The dualist speaks of the path of light and traveling to the world of the Creator. Shankara applies the laser to the geography of the Absolute. His breaths do not depart. Being Brahman, he goes to Brahman. For the knower of the Supreme Brahman, there is no traveling. If the self is all-pervading, where can it go? If there is no other, who is there to meet? The dissolution of the sage is like the breaking of a jar. The space inside the jar does not travel to meet the great space. It simply ceases to be limited. Disembodied freedom is not a journey to the stars. It is the end of the hallucination of distance. What remains when the last shadow falls? Shankara defines the Absolute as a solid, partless mass of awareness. It is not a void, for it is the witness of the void's absence. It is not a person, for it has no boundaries. It is bliss, but not the bliss of feeling good. It is the bliss of total non-duality, the peace that remains when there is no longer any second to disturb the silence. The Brahma Sutra Bhashya has done its work. It has moved from the era of the introduction to the fullness of the conclusion. Ignorance, executed, difference, vaporized, breath and space, reclaimed as Brahman, the sovereign, seated in the unblinking sun of the self. The fortress is no longer a defense. It has become the universe. The king no longer rules. He is. Here ends the sovereign foundation, the expedition through the Brahma Sutra Bhashya.